Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And I'm pleased to welcome Jason Fordney. He is the editor of California Energy Markets. Jason, welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Thank you, Robert. How are you?
Good. Thank you. So there are a lot of things going on in California, and I want to get right to it. But before that, I warned you, I'm going to have you introduce yourself on this podcast. Okay. Guests introduce themselves. So imagine you have 45 or 60 seconds. You don't know anyone, and you've been asked to introduce yourself. Please, by all means.
Sure. Well, my name's Jason Fordney. I'm editor of California Energy Markets. I've been an energy journalist for a little over 20 years. I'm based in Nevada City, which is in the Sierra foothills. I've been in California about 5 years, from Virginia originally, and spent many years in DC working for some of the bigger price reporting agency / news organizations where I really built my experience learning the power industry. And I've always focused on electricity. I've done everything from market assessments, pricing, general news, and got my start as a regular newspaper reporter back in suburban Virginia, covering crime. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Good. Mm-hmm. Well, so let's jump right in because I know we talked before we started recording. I've written a little bit about California. I'm fairly familiar. What is going on in California? I mean, these, as I sent you the piece that I had in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago talking about the residential rates in California went up nearly 12% last year. What's going on? Why are these rates going up so high?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. I think if you look at as I've posted on Twitter, if you look at the generation portion of the bill, the energy cost is just a fraction of the retail bill. We have a lot of wildfire mitigation costs that are coming in, decarbonization, and just, obviously California is a pretty regulation heavy state. And what you can see is that the utilities are really being utilized to meet a lot of the environmental goals in the state. And that's putting those costs on utility ratepayers. Everything from EV infrastructure to decarbonization. There's a heavy, obviously, a very heavy focus on decarbonization. This really flows from the state legislature.
Right.
Various reasons for it. And, it's a noble goal, but we have some serious affordability, reliability problems here.
Well, so let's talk about that. You talked about it stems from the legislation. So the state has a 100% clean electricity mandate by 2045, a net zero goal by 2045. I mean, these are very, very ambitious. And I want to talk about Diablo Canyon and nuclear, but you said we talked about the rate increase from 20 to 21, but now you just recently wrote a piece as well, I think it was on March 1st, about PG&E requesting a rate increase of 18% in 2023. So the rate increases that have been seen already are only a precursor of what's to come. I mean, what is this all wildfire, more decarbonization? Is all more of the same costs that are being put on the ratepayers?
Yeah, I think the wildfire costs and just we're really, really playing catch up with maintenance of the system, particularly PG&E. There's been a history here in California of pretty much allowing them to get the state of the grid into a pretty decrepit state. The climate change plays a role. We're having more severe fires, and those costs increasingly being put on consumers, which is a sort of change of an approach. But for instance, here's something we found back in 2012. The PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, actually had a ruling where they told PG&E they don't have to inspect their lines as much here in Northern California because the risk of wildfire is low. That was under Michael Peavy, who I think it's safe to say was somewhat known as a utility-friendly president of the PUC. He's not here to defend himself, but there's a long history with that. So, and I think there's been a history of allowing profits to go to shareholders, and they just have not invested enough in the system. But you cannot deny the drought, the incredibly dry conditions that we have here that have made the wildfires more severe. Decarbonization, renewables getting a lot cheaper, but from a reliability aspect, I know we're talking rates here. We have our PSPSs, the public safety power shutoffs. So a lot of factors in play, and not many of them good. So I think it gets down to the regulation, and I think it gets down to the overemphasis on the carbon molecule and less so on delivering affordable, reliable power. And we're sort of living with the results of that now.
Wow, that's really well stated. I like that, the overemphasis on the carbon molecule and not enough emphasis on reliability.
Yeah, and it's, this is dangerous territory to walk on because, climate is almost a religion in California. I understand that. But it's very easy to get on the wrong side of people when you start discussing decarbonization and any sort of slowing of that. But I don't. People will fight back if you draw a direct relationship between power bills and decarbonization. There are other factors, but the regulatory costs are high, and we have a surplus in California. So if there's ways to shift some of these programs,
a surplus of you're talking about solar electricity in particular,
Yeah.
but that's only for a few hours, right? We're talking about the duck curve here, right? You've got a surplus for a few hours in the 24-hour cycle, and that's also seasonal, right? It varies by season, but go ahead. I just wanted to clarify that, but before you before you kept going.
Well, I meant a financial surplus from our budget.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
The state coffers right now are swollen with money, and we have a lot of federal money coming in. So one concept I've heard people discuss is maybe some of these programs, like there's a lot of money going into EV charging infrastructure on utilities that ends up in bills. Why not move that out of the captive ratepayer base to the general fund? And I don't know what sort of momentum or discussion is happening on that. But if you take a chance and listen in on a PUC public hearing on the PG&E rate hikes, it's amazing. I mean, people are really, really angry. They're upset. They're scared. I mean, people are saying they can't run their air conditioners. They can't run their heat. And obviously for low income people, it's energy costs are a larger portion of their household bill.
Sure.
And it just affects them more. And then, California, we have the highest gas prices. Food costs are super high. So it's increasingly
you tweeted recently you paid $6.19. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. $6.19. And, we'll see $7, I'm pretty sure.
So I'm here in Austin. I just, I passed the gas fuel station. I think it was $3.99 here. Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, you're lucky.
Well, right. I'm not bragging here, but I mean, you're paying 50% more than customers throughout the rest of here in Texas. I mean, it's a different environment, and you have a different gasoline blend and all the rest of it. But I think that's really interesting. You mentioned, I think in some of in one of the pieces you wrote about the PG&E rate hike, you talked about these people calling into the hearing, and just that there was. Well, I hesitate to use the word rage, but you said there was just a ton of anger among ordinary consumers about what they're seeing. And are they directing it at the utility commissioners, or who should they be directing their anger at? I guess would be the more correct question.
Well, a lot of PG&E is really despised in California for many reasons. I mean, it's a convicted felon. It's killed a lot of people. So a lot of that anger is towards the utility, but also the PUC I'm struck by some of the people that I hear speaking. I can tell they're not people that are normally tuned into the regulatory world, but they've sought out these hearings. They've sought out who's making these decisions, and they want to talk to them. And it's everything from young people to elderly people on fixed budgets that are just outraged by their bills. I mean, it's their bills are extremely high, and when they see them getting higher, they're understandably upset about it. Yeah, it's
Yeah, you say outraged by their bills. I mean, in some cases, you were what were you saying? In some of these, the bills were $500 a month, and that they doubled in the last couple of years. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, I think over the past few years, you've seen a jump, and natural gas prices are high.
Yeah,
that's another one. There's just so many components feeding into it, and all of them seem to be rising. When it comes to blame, the PUC 9 times out of 10 is following legislative directives, and I think that's where a lot of this flows from. And there's, the utilities have always had a decent amount of political power in California,
right? Especially
PG&E. So yeah, I think it's just a combination of factors here. And there's been days of hearings. I've not heard one caller say anything good about PG&E or their bills.
Well, but can we look back a little bit, because I know you've been following this industry for a while, and not bragging here or anything, but my first book was on Enron. Now it's 20 years ago it came out, and suddenly I feel like an old man, right? But but Enron gamed the California system, and as I think about it, the California utility sector has been a mess for decades. I mean, Schwarzenegger came into power by running against Gray Davis about electricity prices. So. Right. Is there something else that, I mean, this isn't I guess what my point is this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been going on a long time, but it seems like now it's coming. I hesitate to use the word crisis, but I think that's the right one, that you have the consumers finally saying this is crazy town. But why has it gone on so long? I mean, can you answer that? I mean, PG&E's taken bankruptcy twice in the last 20 years. Why? How do you explain that?
Well, you had the first power crisis, which caused California to pull back from restructuring back to a monopoly system. We're always in crisis mode here. It's just the way it's been. And honestly, the utilities have a lot of power in the state legislature. I've been sitting in the halls myself. This was probably a couple of years ago, and a certain assemblyman came out and said, I just heard from from SCE, Southern California Edison. Let's get to work. So it's pretty clear. And I was staying there with a staffer, and she's like, there's a reporter standing here. But that was kind of enlightening. And, they put a lot of money in the political coffers, and investor-owned utilities are huge. They have a lot of political power. And it's only recently, the past few years, I think, where things have gotten so bad that politically it's starting to become more of an issue. But, you don't see much action from the legislature on these costs. For instance, we have a 51 cent per gallon gas tax in California.
Right.
And there was recently a legislation,
which is incredibly regressive, right? I mean, who's going to this increases the energy burden on low and middle income folks far more than on people that, and no burden at all on the Tesla driver, right? That doesn't matter to them, right? But for the tradesmen, the people that commute, the people that don't work in the keyboard economy, to use Jennifer Hernandez's line, I mean, this is terrible for them.
I know, and I live in a rural area. I live in a wildfire country out here in Nevada County. And I see this, California, 5% of California is rural residents, compared to an average of 19% nationally. I just happen to be looking at this from the Lawrence Berkeley Lab report on solar demographics.
Right.
So the rural population in California has zero political weight, and it's dominated by, not to get political, it's dominated by urban liberals that are very, for good reason, concerned about climate change and pollution. But in rural areas, these people are definitely being left behind. I just saw an editorial today about, stupid people that drive big vehicles. He mentioned SUVs. This is San Francisco Chronicle, basically complaining that gas prices aren't high enough. There's a punitive attitude towards energy use in California. And you're right, it goes straight to the lower income people. Out where I live, I drive a pickup truck. It's a 6-cylinder, but we have a lot of recreation out here. I just have things I need to carry. I can't drive a Prius. I can't ride my bike to work.
Right.
And nobody around here can. We have long distances. It's a 25-minute drive to my daughter's school. So you have to drive longer distances. Tradespeople out here, they need big vehicles. We have a massive amount of forest work and tree cutting going on here. So yeah, it's just the political climate is really dominated by the urban population. And that's one reason for it.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that because I've also interviewed Assemblyman Jim Cooper, who's from Elk Grove, and I've written about him in Forbes, and he's pointed out that what is it that one of the Bay Area Senate districts in California has collected more EV rebates than the 9 lowest income Senate districts, if my memory serves, the 7 or 9 lowest income Senate districts in the state. That the concentration, to your point about this idea of, people should be driving EVs. Well, that's easy for people who live in the Bay Area who don't commute very far or don't carry lumber or timber and, snowmobiles or, pull a bass boat. It's easy for them to say, but they're not the people who are the tradesmen, as you point out, because that seems to me they're the ones that are really being hammered here, not just by the high motor fuel prices, but by the high electricity prices. So I'm just making that observation, but I just thought, it was something that Cooper has called out last year, I think, or the year before, saying this is just done fundamentally wrong in terms of equity in the system.
It is. It's a big issue I deal with a lot and debate with people a lot. We have the solar net metering dispute that's going on right now. I did an editorial on it saying the conversation needs to grow up here. There's a lot of demonizing that goes on towards fossil fuels, fossil plants, and it's really gotten to kind of a ridiculous point. You see a lot of college educated, I'm going to say white because demographically this is true.
Yeah.
College educated white people that are obsessed with climate change, and again, for good reason, but there's a very little consideration given to lower income people, tradespeople, rural people. I mean, the culture in California is driven by the tech industry in San Francisco, and if you look at these demographics, like the Lawrence Berkeley report that just came out, the median income of solar owners is 6 digits.
Right.
They are 6% of home solar owners are Black people. So there are clear disparities here, but as soon as you start getting into this, there's a lot of defensiveness, a lot of pushback. The net metering conversation in particular, if people aren't aware, is the PUC is basically cutting the net metering payback for solar owners.
Right.
And when you start looking at people that drive EVs, have a Tesla battery in their house, solar panels, they're all homeowners. Renters aren't putting in solar for obvious reasons.
Right.
So when you have state programs that are kicking all kinds of free goodies to wealthy people, it's an issue. There's nobody in an apartment in Sacramento in a working class job that's benefiting from these policies.
Right.
I have friends that, I have a friend, his household income is $30,000 a month, and he's waiting for his free Tesla battery. It's just wrong, and again, I think things have gone off the rails a little bit with these programs. And when you try to address it, PUC is just getting hammered. Anybody that questions this is getting hammered.
Right. Well, let's talk about that solar rooftop issue, because I've written a little bit about that as well. And remembering Ashley Brown from the Harvard Electricity Project, he called the rooftop solar. He called it Robin Hood in reverse. Right. That the poor are subsidizing the rich, and it sure seems like that. And yet, the effort to defend the rooftop solar, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger had a piece in the New York Times. I mean, the solar industry reacted to it with a very aggressive PR campaign to try and oppose this rollback that you were talking about. Explain. Can you explore that a little bit? Because it seems like the media effort that the solar industry put on to defeat the rollback of the net metering was really quite effective, it appears.
It really was, and it was quite dramatic. And I do have to say, I don't have an opinion on this. I do cover it. I'm an objective journalist. I did write an editorial about the debate itself. Are we having an honest conversation here? Which I don't believe we are.
Well, explore that, because you said what it was that we need to grow up about it. How do you mean? I
think that we need to stop this good versus evil approach. And this is my opinion. There again, the demonizing, the basic attitude that anything that holds solar back in any way is bad. Well, when you're talking about grid planning, when you're talking about allocation of costs, it's one dimensional. And that's not the way to go about it. So yeah, when you have Hollywood actors, it wasn't just Arnold, it was Mark Ruffalo and Ed Norton. I mean, Mark Ruffalo called out Ralph Cavanagh from NRDC by name, and he's got millions of Twitter followers, and said, go give Ralph Cavanagh a hard time. I asked Ralph about this. He didn't want to talk about it, but so yeah, it's I use the superhero metaphor in my column. Everybody likes the good versus evil. It's simple. The evangelistic zeal among the solar climate community has gotten, and this is my opinion, has gotten a little bit out of hand. And any questioning of it, I mean, the PUC. To say that the PUC is anti-solar is completely ridiculous. I mean, the PUC is passing everything they can on decarbonization, and mostly driven by legislation. Right. California Energy Commission is now the California Decarbonization Commission. I mean, we know this. And you do hear there are programs, there are conversations that happen with the regulators, but they're under so much pressure and high level pressure on this issue that it's going to be very difficult. They had this proposed decision that was going to cut the payback. The CPUC president departed. I think there's various reasons for that, and was replaced by Governor Newsom's energy advisor, who pulled it off the agenda. We have to revisit this. I think it's safe to say, they're going to be more in the political direction. Unfortunately, in California, you don't have the balance. You have a very unilateral political environment with the legislature
dominated by the Democratic Party.
Right. And again, I don't want to get political. I just, as an energy journalist, I look at three things. I do look at decarbonization. We write about it all the time. In fact, I've been not accused, but we've had some reader feedback. You guys are too focused on decarbonization. But affordability and reliability are the other two legs of that stool.
Right.
And unfortunately, particularly in the media, we have a lot of younger journalists coming in that are completely focused on climate change and are really focused on stamping out fossil fuels. I totally get it. I just think when you're talking about a transition like this, you've got to do it carefully. You can't crush the working class. You can't crush low-income people with your decarbonization strategies. And we haven't even gotten into the reliability issue that solar has created in California, which is almost sacrilegious to say, but it's the ramping issue is incredible.
Let's talk about that, because one of the things that, and I've written about this, I had a piece in Forbes, a couple of weeks ago, talking about, what happened here in Texas. And of course, we had a big blackout in February of last year.
Right.
But because of this massive amount of new solar and wind that is proposed and potentially going to be on the ERCOT grid by the end of next year, the ERCOT is expecting almost as much solar to be installed in Texas as now exists in California. Yeah. So we're facing a similar kind of issue, but talk about the ramping issue there, because and explain what you mean there, if you don't mind, because I think a lot of listeners don't quite understand this idea, and also you're talking about ramping, so this is involved with the duck curve, right? This is this idea of about a massive amount of solar and then suddenly going away. If you don't mind, just to explain that briefly.
Yeah, it's fairly simple. We have a huge amount of solar in California, both rooftop and utility scale.
Something like 30,000 megawatts, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So the rooftop solar is not visible to the ISO, the independent system operator, which operates and dispatches transmission, the generation, and runs a transmission system. So rooftop solar shows up as a demand reduction. The problem is when the sun goes down and everyone goes home to cook dinner and turn their lights on, is precisely when all the solar is coming off. And that deficit is made up with natural gas, always has been, and imports. Imports are dwindling in California. There's less available power in the neighboring states. So what you have is, I don't know what the ramping level is now. It's gigawatts and gigawatts, where the system, and these plants are not designed to run this way, the system has to ramp up dramatically in the evening hours, which is when we see the problems. And in summer, when it's hot and the air conditioning load is so heavy, that's when the problems happen. That's what happened in August 2020. So when you talk about ramping, you're talking about ramping
and the imports weren't available from other states because they had their own power demand to meet.
Exactly.
And you said
we have a Western heat wave.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said imports are dwindling. I know California has long been one of the biggest importers. It has long been the biggest electricity importer of any state. I didn't realize that the availability of the imports was declining. How much so?
Well, be tough. I can't really put a number on it over my head. It's just something that I've heard repeatedly from the ISO. There's more renewables being built in surrounding states also. And I don't want to pin this all on renewables. There's a lot of different factors.
Right.
And then with all the wildfires, the transmission system is also inadequate. Right. So when we have fires, it takes down a transmission line. We came very close this past July to more outages. We're really on the edge. The grid is always running on the edge. Imports dwindling, increasing wildfires affecting the transmission lines, and base load generation going away. We're going to lose Diablo Canyon. That's creating a lot of nervousness, a lot of pressure on the regulators to get rid of gas plants. And I'm not arguing in favor of one technology or another, but I do have to take an honest look at the reasons for this. One thing I found very interesting was there was a high-level CPUC official who told me that for years the legislature has pressured the PUC to keep a reserve margin as tight as it can because they don't want excess capacity. There was controversy about we had too much capacity in California a few years ago. Right. So again, the legislature, why aren't you getting rid of these gas plants? Where the regulators need to balance. And then the ISO has to make it all work. And the ISO is just jamming all kinds of levers and gum, chewing gum, and doing everything they can.
Spit, baling wire, and duct
Ugh.
tape. Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, our market is now so complicated and ever changing that that's creating issues too with the price signals. We don't really have a really functioning market. It's you hear Commissioner Danley at FERC just railing on this. Why aren't we investigating California? At what point can we say it's a crisis? We've got the highest bills, we've got terrible reliability. And decarbonization is great, but it's an example of some of the negative impacts. When you talk about Texas, what was so ironic to me is Texas has the opposite political environment to California. And the problem with that February freeze was gas plants, gas plants freezing up. Again, I found a NERC report from 2011 when they had a similar problem saying you need to improve your system because of freeze ups.
Right.
So that, I saw people, Californians saying, oh, look at Texas, you guys with, you're conservative, you're low regulation, and you had the same problem. So we have sort of different ends of the seesaw here.
But the same result with
right.
regressive impacts on the low and middle income people, right? The less reliability, more people. I've been watching Generac, right? The standby generator company, and in their own investor reports are saying, hey, business is booming in Texas and California. I mean,
absolutely.
So you mentioned Diablo Canyon. I'll come back to the standby generators in a moment, but it's one of the things I wanted to talk with you about. To me, it seems just like energy suicide for California to close Diablo Canyon. That's my opinion, and I'm just gonna, and I think it's a fact. I just think it seems like just incredibly short-sighted and being pushed by. You mentioned NRDC; they're the big promoter of this closure. I'll ask the question: Is Diablo Canyon going to close beginning in 2024 as is now planned?
Yes, I'm fairly certain it will.
Despite everything that's happened in the last few months, despite the Ukraine crisis, despite all the reasons why it should stay open, they're going to close it anyway.
It would be a miracle for it to stay open. It's never been a popular facility. When it was opened, there was huge demonstrations. Right. It's on the coast. There's fault lines. People are afraid of what might happen if there's an earthquake. There's a massive settlement that was done. NRDC was the main player in that to, replace the resources. I think that ship has sailed. We had dueling editorials. There are people out there saying, keep it open. We ran an editorial on that. NRDC responded with their own saying, no, this is a carefully crafted settlement. These concerns are not valid, but it's going to be interesting. I mean, we rely on that plant. It's just the truth. The Holy Grail is supposed to be storage. That's all you hear CAISO talking about right now is they're really blown out the storage capacity, but that's only 4 hours. And will it be fully charged? It is starting to make a difference. It's still a very small portion of our supply, though. Right. So,
well, you had something, was it in Twitter or on Twitter? And by the way, let me just a quick station identification here, as they say in the radio business. My guest is Jason Fordney. He's the editor of California Energy Markets. I've admired his work for a long time. He's on Twitter at Fordney Energy, at Fordney Energy on Twitter. So let's talk about batteries. Jason, California now have 2,600 megawatts of capacity, something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, approaching that. Mm-hmm.
And is that 2,600 megawatt hours? Is that right? Or I see these nameplate, but then how many hours of storage? Because that's really the operative issue, isn't it?
It really is. We're going to need long duration storage, and we're going to need different technologies. This is all overwhelmingly lithium ion, which has several issues to it. You can look on the
including that little fire thing that keeps.
yeah, yeah.
Tell
That's
me
a
about
problem.
Moss. Since we're on that, what's
Right.
the status with Moss Landing? Has Moss Landing come back into operation? This is the big lithium-ion battery facility in. I forgot where it's located. It's owned by Vistra though, and it was
Yeah.
shut down several months ago after a fire, and then they restarted it, and they had some thermal problem more
Right.
recently. Is that right? But
hmm
it's still not back online.
No, it's still offline. Yeah, a bit of a bruise. I think it's the biggest energy storage facility in the world. It's 400 megawatts total. You have phase one is, I forget which one, but one's 300 megawatts, the other one's 100 megawatts. Uh, the fires was actually caused by a sprinkler system that engaged, and it wasn't really a traditional lithium ion problem. It was the sprinkler system problem, and they're very sensitive about this. But yeah, what can you say? The facility's been offline for months. There was a lot of fanfare around it, but it wasn't like in Arizona. You had the exploding facility there that almost killed some firefighters.
Right.
Looking at their injuries, I couldn't see how they'd ever be the same. They were blown into a fence. What happened with that one was gases built up. Firefighters showed up, opened the door, it ignited, blew up. That was a bad one.
When
Yeah.
was that one? I'm not. I vaguely remember this. Is this a couple years ago?
Yeah, it's been within the past couple of years.
And it was lithium ion again.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
it was lithium ion facility. That was more traditional. Everybody knows that they explode. It happens with laptop batteries.
Right.
It's a bit of a problem to say the least. But you're seeing more money going to other types of battery technologies. I think that'll be key also.
Right. Well, you last month you tweeted this. You said this is why it's disturbing that first we have so many outages in California, and second that there is such a blasé attitude towards reliability. While decarbonization is the constant and overwhelming focus of the discussion among lawmakers, regulators, media, etc. Why is there a blasé attitude toward reliability? Hasn't that led to a surge in and then my question is, that's led to a huge surge in, I talked about Generac a moment ago, in standby generator deployment. I looked at a report that Bloom Energy published recently that was talking about the number of large diesel gensets being deployed in the Bay Area. I mean, just huge numbers, increases in, the double-digit percentages in 1 year. Is this just that California is particularly industry and industrial operators are looking around and saying, hey, we can't rely on the grid, we're going to make our own?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are all for data centers, or overwhelmingly for data centers. They're almost always diesel. And yeah, I did a column on this that Sammy Roth over at LA Times was nice enough to put in his newsletter. We got a whole lot of attention on this. I was just writing up the M.Cubed study.
Right. Yeah.
A really interesting situation. The guy that did this study, his daughter, they proposed a big diesel genset right next to his daughter's school, and he started looking into it. I've definitely seen a tendency to not cover this up, but definitely not point it out. We can't get numbers on how much these generators are being run. Some people say, well, they're just backup for when the outages go out. Well, they test them a lot too.
Yeah.
But yeah, the diesel capacity between Los Angeles and San Francisco is equivalent to 15% of our total grid capacity. So you have a very sketchy grid and companies just building diesel everywhere, particularly in the Bay Area, because they know they need the power. I started looking into this, in Europe, they don't have to do this. Right. Because they have a more reliable system. It's a little bit of, and again, my stuff on Twitter is my opinion. If you read my coverage, I don't put my opinion into the coverage other than my editorials. I want to be clear on that. And
sure,
this is all my opinion, not the opinion of my employer or anybody. But it's a bit scandalous to me. And the kicker for me was the one of the representatives or assemblymen or senators from the Bay Area introduced this legislation to ban gas-powered generators, which I have one. Everybody around here has one. So at the time when the grid is getting worse and worse, they're banning the primary source of what people are using to keep the lights on. I mean, I moved here in 2017. I found myself with our first PSPS. I mean, I have a wife and daughter. It was cold. I had to go buy a generator. I was lucky I can afford an $1,100 generator. And, you know, we spent days running our fridge and stove in survival mode. And now they're taking that away. So it's just almost cruelty that I see here when you have a Bay Area legislator outlawing equipment that people absolutely need and rely on. They'll find ways. I mean, people out here, this is gold country, they're very resilient. They'll go to Nevada and buy one. But
did that measure pass, the one that was proposed on the banning of it passed the assembly and was signed into law?
Yeah. It's
oh my God.
24, 25. Yeah, you won't be able to buy a gas-powered generator.
Or an internal combustion engine for your vehicle, or a vehicle with a standard engine. I mean, this is going to be great business for auto dealers in Reno and Tahoe, right? That's seems like that's obvious to me from where I'm sitting, but I don't live there. I mean, is that? Well, let me ask about that, because you mentioned your daughter. Our oldest daughter, Mary, just moved to Los Angeles about a year ago, and she likes it there, but is this going to? A lot of people are leaving California. California lost a congressional seat for the first time ever in the after the last census. Do you know people who are leaving the state, and are there a lot of them? What's your sense of the migration pattern?
Well, in my area, the fire problem is a primary reason. People move here and leave. I've seen it over and over again. Fire season is really tough around here. The smoke was just, it went on for weeks. Literally, I live up in the Sierra at 5,000 feet. It's just a wall of gray, as far as you can see. It's a disaster zone. So that in my area, that's been a big reason for the migration. And it's an incredibly expensive place to live. Our food costs are high. Our gas costs are high. There's a very unilateral political environment. People are frustrated that it's just a one-way street. And I don't know what point people get so frustrated that there's political change, but it's a tricky one. And a lot of people leaving. It's just a tough place to live. It's a beautiful state. It's a spectacular state. And I think people are willing to live here for the recreation, right? The environment, but you're paying a big premium to live here. Right. There's no doubt about that. And people are, getting priced out. Right.
Yeah. Mary sent me a photo. She filled her car the other day and sent me a picture of the gas pump. And I think at that time she was paying $5.75 or something. And I talked to her later. She said something effective. Dad, you're right about this energy and power stuff. I said, well, love you, sweetie. Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that from you. But tell me about your situation, Jason, because you live off the grid. You live you said you live at 5,000 feet, and you rely on solar panels, propane, and batteries. Are you using lead acid batteries? Give me the dimensions on your system there, if you don't mind. I'd geek out on all this stuff.
Yeah, first thing I want to say, it's not my system.
Okay.
I live on a property, sort of a communal property.
Okay.
My friends own this system. We have a pretty large solar array and the lead acid battery system. I'd have to check on the capacity. I have it written down somewhere.
No problem.
But then we have two sizable generators, and not like your little Honda generator. These are more. Yeah. But we run those all the time, and I could not see us running on strictly the solar and battery. And we don't use that much energy. There's only a few of us. And we got a quote to expand our system. It was over $200,000.
Wow.
So there's a disconnect here. If people are saying, well, everybody just get some solar and batteries, until you put it into practice, you'll realize that it's, number one, out of touch for most people.
Right.
And number two, you're not going to have the power that you need to power a traditional American lifestyle. We'll get there. I mean, the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper, but at this time, it's premature to expect people to be able to do this. Yeah.
So have you calculated what your electricity costs are there? Have you ever done that math on that?
I haven't. We'd have to look at our propane bill too. So I don't really know what it costs. I know, for instance, in the big January storm, we still had power all the way through it. And up where I live, there was a lot of people suffering. I mean, I was picking up people on the side of the road that were hiking out from their houses. We had 5 feet of snow. I mean, it was crazy. So, the people really suffer when it's cold and the power's out, and maybe not enough attention really being paid to that. That's why when I first came here, I remember tweeting, decarb is important. So is affordability and reliability. And that was nobody was talking about reliability in California until August 2020. And then the media, when that happened, the media started paying more attention. And I've seen a little bit of a shift, because overwhelmingly the California media are, climate heavy proponents, which I get that. To me, it's about, we have to manage this in a way and not punish people for using energy, because we all use it. And there's no need to demonize car drivers. And you start to get, I just posted this morning, I'll probably get in trouble. I always have to watch it on Twitter, but because I don't believe we should be doing strong opinions about the things we write about as journalists. But, I try to keep a balance there. But there's an elitism that comes from people in urban areas saying, park your car, don't use propane. I mean, everybody out here runs on propane.
Sure.
It's, the local gas company is terrible. But you can't just take away these energy sources and tell everybody to drive an EV. But there's no chargers out here,
And there won't be.
Well, hopefully more. I mean, there's a lot of efforts to build infrastructure, and I've seen them talk about rural charging infrastructure. But at this point, you can charge at home, but I mean, we have a lot of outages here.
Sure.
A lot. If you start looking at it, we have PSPSs, and then we just have our good old normal outages too. So to ask people to depend on their electricity to drive their cars at this point, not tenable in this area.
Sure. So just a few more questions. And again, my guest is Jason Fordney. He's the editor of California Energy Markets. You can find him on newsdata.com. He's also on Twitter at Fordney Energy. So Jason, imagine, I've just been appointed king, and I'm going to make you the energy czar in California. What would be the first things you'd do?
Oh gosh, I never really thought about that. Let me think.
And maybe I meant different, given what's
That's
happening.
all right.
The potentate. I won't use, since Putin wants to be the new czar. I'm not going to use czar anymore. If you're the energy master, you're the energy supreme commandant in California. What would you do? Would you keep Diablo Canyon open?
Ah, man, you're really putting me on the spot there. I don't think I can opine on that, because I do write about it. I would say I have to speak more in generalities.
Okay.
I would say let's do this in a way that keeps energy affordable. One thing I would do is, like I said before, I would stop putting so many state programs on the backs of utility ratepayers, which is also a shrinking customer base, because we have a massive migration to community choice aggregators.
Right.
Which when they first started, they tended to be in wealthier areas. They have boutique green energy options. Do you want to pay more for green? Oh yeah, sign me up, because they can afford it.
Right.
Well, you have a shrinking traditional utility
Rate
rate
base.
base.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is increasingly footing the cost for these state programs. That's one. I would definitely, I guess I'm safe on this. I would repeal the gas tax. You have a state surplus. Why put a 50-cent gallon, hammer to the everyday consumer? In terms of the electricity grid, it's tough. The toothpaste is out of the tube in terms of natural gas in California. I mean, the environmental groups are just on it 24/7, getting rid of these gas plants. I would just say in general, if there is a way, I mean, I understand climate change. I don't want to give the impression that I don't recognize the urgency, especially coming to California, as climate change is much more in your face than when I lived in the East Coast, or it's more of an abstraction. We're living in a place where it's blazing sun for 2-3 months straight without a drop of rain. I've witnessed the drought, the crazy wildfires. I mean, I live 60 miles from Paradise. I know people that had lost their houses in Paradise, and you can put a lot of that on climate, but I would say let's manage this transition in a way that is fair to lower income people, keeps costs reasonable. And I have certain thoughts about PG&E. You have an investor-owned utility where people are making money off of basically, it's safe to say, a criminal organization. For instance, the bankruptcy, there was a lot of people on Wall Street made a lot of money on the bankruptcy, where you have homeowners in this area that still haven't seen a dime and had their house burned down. A lot of outrage over that. So yeah, I have to keep it kind of general, and I don't want to give people the impression that I have an agenda as a journalist.
Sure. Right.
But as an editor, I am able to write editorials, so I'm able to get my opinion out there, and I do it on social media too. Occasionally, people get angry, but again, once you're up against what I call the zeal here of the environmental community, it gets touchy really quickly. So
right. So just a couple last questions then, Jason, but I completely agree with you on the affordability, that there has to be some balance in terms of this, effort, but which is what I wrote in that piece in the journal. So just two more things. So what are you reading these days? I know your job keeps you busy, and you told me you do a lot of things outdoors. Any books that you're reading, recommend these days? What do you have on your bookshelf?
Well, I read a lot of newspapers.
Right. Yeah.
I do our clips here. I'm not reading much on energy. I'm reading a nice anthology of Jack London short stories.
To build a fire, and the rest of those. Yeah. Right. There's the classics. Yeah.
I started with his earlier stuff. I spent a lot of time imbibed in the California media world. So I'm pretty tuned into that. Not really reading much on energy in terms of the literary.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm not holding you to that. I don't care whether it's energy, non-energy, fiction, nonfiction. Just curious about what's on the list.
Yeah, I try to keep track of how energy is being covered and presented in California.
Right.
And these issues are all front and center for me. So I read a lot of editorials, a lot of, the Chronicle, LA Times. Sure. I occasionally communicate with other journalists.
Right.
And then I just spend a lot of time writing. That's a lot of our focus here, obviously.
Sure. No,
increasingly podcasting.
Yeah. And you produce a lot. So the last question, Jason, so what we covered, and as I think about it sometimes, the challenges in California are just enormous, and you have all these competing interests, and the rural versus the urban, et cetera. So the question is this: what gives you hope?
Oh gosh, it can be really grim covering this industry. We spent a lot of time on wildfires. lot of death. What gives me hope? Gosh, I don't know. I guess what gives me hope is that we'll change some of the dynamics here, and that if people in the environmental groups, the politicians, could be a little bit more tuned into the needs of everyday people, that'd be great. But man, it's tough to be optimistic about too much here, and I hate to be negative, but we have a lot of problems, and I guess here's one thing. I'm seeing a lot more collaboration. We have a movement towards a regional wholesale market in the West, which I think will happen eventually. We have a California wholesale market, and then a lot of non-RTO stuff. We have the energy imbalance market, which is a regional market, but it's just a balancing market. So I think what I'm seeing, a lot more collaboration between the Western states on these issues, mainly on markets, and the function of markets is integrating renewables in an affordable way. I think that'll help. And I think there's a lot more collaboration happening in the West. Elliot Mainzer, who's the fairly new CEO over at the independent system operator, is really focused on this. And so there's more synergy. Traditionally, there's been a lot of mistrust of California by surrounding states. And so that has led to really a lack of collaboration and planning. So I do think we'll see improvement in that, and developing a wholesale market that will allow more efficient dispatch and hopefully solve some of these problems.
Good. Well,
okay.
That's kind of a wonky answer, but it's a wonky,
Okay.
it's a wonky system.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. But we can stop there then. I think that's a good, summary. I mean, it is an incredibly complex system. And as you say, California's grid and the operation of it is incredibly complex. But I have been following your work for a long time. I've admired it for a long time. So I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.
And again, my guest has been Jason Fordney. He's the editor of California Energy Markets. You can find out more about him at newsdata.com. Follow him on Twitter at Fordney Energy. Jason, thanks again for being on the Power Hungry podcast.
Thanks very much, Robert. It's my pleasure. Great talking to you.
And to all of you in podcast land, tune in for the next episode of this podcast right here on this same channel. Until then, see ya.